Russian occupiers continue to assault the positions of Ukrainian defenders. Since the beginning of the day, 107 combat clashes have already been recorded, according to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. The Pokrovsk direction remains the most tense, both in terms of information and, of course, militarily. All the details about the situation on the battlefield, as well as information about successful long-range strikes by the Ukrainian armed forces on several strategic targets on the territory of the Russian Federation. Report.
Ukrainian Neptune missiles and Bars drones struck several strategic targets on Russian territory. This information was confirmed by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine last night in Taganrog, Rostov region. The Beriev aircraft repair plant and the Atlant Aero UAV manufacturing facility were hit. Explosions and large-scale fires were reported there. During the strike on the plant, an experimental A-60 aircraft and equipment for Russian strategic aviation were likely damaged. Ukrainian defenders also struck an oil terminal in Novorossiysk and a pumping station, the oil refinery in Tuapse, Krasnodar Krai. Oil equipment and an S-400 air defense missile system launcher were damaged. The extent of the damage is being clarified. Border Guard drone operators from the Stalovi and Kordon brigades destroyed an enemy robotic ground complex, a shelter, and 4 Russian occupiers in the Kursk and North Slobozhansk directions. In addition, in this sector, Ukrainian defenders repelled 2 Russian attacks. In the Lyman direction, the Russian army attacked near the settlements of Zarekne, Stavki, and Lyman. The enemy also tried to advance in the Konstantinivka direction in the areas of Pleshchevka, Sherbinovka, Rusinyar, Sofiyivka, and Novopavlivka. And in the Pokrovsky direction, Russian occupiers unsuccessfully tried to push Ukrainian defenders from their positions in populated areas. Points Volnoe, Krasny Liman, Rodinskoye, Mirnograd, and
Udaknoye is a large open-pit diamond mine located in the Sakha Republic, also known as Yakutia in northeastern Russia. The name Udaknoye translates to lucky in Russian, reflecting the fortune associated with its discovery. The mine was discovered in 1955 and is operated by Alrosa, a major Russian diamond mining company. Udaknoye is one of the largest diamond mines in the world and has played a significant role in Russia's diamond production. With the use of a large number of drones, shells, weapons, basically everything needed to conduct combat operations, and yet everything is covered and nothing can be brought in. Something about that doesn't add up, does it? Maybe it actually is possible to bring things in? It's difficult, but possible.
Russian forces are trying to cut off the land route between Pokrovsk and Mirnograd in order to encircle the city. According to the 7th Air Assault Corps of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, the enemy is assaulting the northern part of Mirnograd with small infantry groups and using drones to adjust their movements. The Ukrainian Armed Forces are reinforcing their grouping in the city to defend the southern outskirts, where the enemy is trying to amass manpower for further attacks. In the northeast of Mirnograd, the 38th Separate Marine Brigade of the Ukrainian Armed Forces captured 4 Russian soldiers. 3 of them were previously prisoners and signed military contracts. According to them, before the assault, they spent 4 days in a basement without food or water. The detainees received the necessary assistance and care in accordance with the standards of international humanitarian law.
Pokrov has been under Russian assault for 16 months already. They still haven't succeeded, and I hope they never will. The key word here is trying. I want to remind you that the concentration is about 161 to 7. There are that many more Russians with 150,000 military personnel there, plus 18,000 Marines who have been added. That makes 168,000, of which about 70,000 are assault units, assault troops. That's a serious force. This means that there is active fighting going on there. Given the number of combat clashes we see from the General Staff's reports. Again, for those smart guys who claim that everything has been cut off, here's a question. What are we fighting with? What is our garrison there fighting with? Well, either we're throwing stones and using bows and arrows, or the information about it. As McDonald's used to say, the information that nothing can be delivered there is a bit exaggerated.
In the Donetsk region, Border Guard drone pilots from the Phoenix unit destroyed 2 of the latest Russian electronic warfare systems, Black Eye. This is modern technology capable of suppressing both reconnaissance drones and surveillance operations, and FPV drones on different frequencies. Experts consider this system extremely dangerous, which is why it is important that Ukrainian defenders have managed to destroy several of these units at once. The enemy is also trying to advance toward Kostiantynivka, but the pilots of the Phoenix Border Guard unit continue to detect and eliminate small Russian infantry groups in forest belts and shelters, as well as strike their logistics.
In Donetsk region, regarding the capture of Mirnohrad, Pokrovsk, and Kostiantynivka, these objectives are included in their combat orders. Every combat action is carried out according to these orders, which are prepared in advance, and each unit receives its assignment detailing what they must do and how to do it. So these combat orders, commonly referred to as BOs or battle orders, which are also known as combat orders, have already been carefully rewritten and adapted in Ukrainian specifically for the winter season. I can't provide the exact date of this update right now, and I also can't specify the precise timing even for the summer of next year. That is, they fully understand that they currently lack the forces and resources to break through our defenses, attempting to find any weakness.
The total losses of the Russian army since the beginning of the full-scale invasion have exceeded 1,167,000 soldiers. These figures were announced by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. Just in the past day, the defense forces eliminated 1,120 Russian occupiers. They also destroyed 2 tanks and 4 armored vehicles, 18 artillery systems, 2 air defense systems, as well as 115 units of enemy vehicles and special equipment.
For the first time in history, the European Parliament has approved a joint program in the field of defense industry between the EU and Ukraine. 457 members of the European Parliament voted in favor. The project is aimed at strengthening the EU's defense industry, facilitating joint European arms procurement, ramping up the overall production of military equipment and supplies, and increasing support for Ukraine. As part of the program, it is proposed to create a dedicated support instrument for Ukraine, which will receive a total of 300 million euros out of the overall budget of 1.5 billion euros until the year 2027.
This program allows for the procurement of defense equipment in Ukraine, with Ukraine, and for Ukraine, as well as investing in Ukrainian industry and supporting the integration of Ukraine's defense sector into the European one. Ukraine's defense industry needs us, but we need Ukrainian innovation even more. In addition, the program brings a revolution to defense industrial policy and lays the foundation for a less fragmented, more innovative, and genuine European defense industry. This will make us stronger, more competitive, and provide many jobs.
Ukraine, Slovakia, and Slovenia have been elected to the Executive Council of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons for the next 2 years. This was reported by Ukraine's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Andriy Sybiha, on the social network X. 99 countries voted for Ukraine. And for the 3rd time in a row, Russia has failed to become a member of the Executive Council. Sybiha emphasized that this victory is not only an honor, but also an important tool for ensuring proper and timely responses to chemical threats arising from Russian aggression against Ukraine. Russia spent nearly 400 million euros to influence the September elections in Moldova through bribery, disinformation, and cyber attacks. This is how Speaker of Parliament Igor Grosu commented on Russia's hybrid war at the International Crimea Platform Summit in Stockholm. According to him, during the recent parliamentary elections, Moldova became the target of an unprecedented disinformation campaign. But the citizens resisted pressure and manipulation, choosing the path of freedom, democracy, and European integration, rather than returning to the Kremlin's sphere of influence. Speaking about Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Igor Grosu stated that the citizens of the Republic of Moldova feel the consequences of this war every day. Changing Ukraine's borders by force, as well as reducing the country's defense capabilities, is unacceptable. Such decisions would make the state more vulnerable to the aggressor. Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Commission, wrote about this on the social network X. She is convinced that it is Brussels that should play a central role in the future peace agreement. In the capital of Angola, leaders of European countries held a special summit on Ukraine. Larisa Petruk will tell you more about this.
Leaders of European countries, as well as the heads of the European Union and the European Commission, discussed the results of the negotiations in Geneva at an informal summit in the capital of Angola. Before the meeting began, the President of the European Council held a phone conversation with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to hear his assessment of the situation. According to Antonio Crivo, for both Kyiv and Brussels, a unified and coordinated EU position is key to ensuring a successful outcome in negotiations to end Russia's war against Ukraine. In
the peace negotiations, a new momentum has emerged. The meeting in Geneva between the United States, Ukraine, the institutions of the European Union and European representatives marked significant progress. We welcome this step forward, but some issues still need to be resolved. However, the direction is positive. It is also clear that issues directly concerning the European Union, such as sanctions, enlargement, or immobilized assets, require the full involvement and decision-making of the European Union. The European Union is determined to provide President Zelensky with all the diplomatic, military, and economic support he needs.
effective European engagement and presence in Geneva have made it possible to achieve significant progress in negotiations for a just and lasting peace in Ukraine, said European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. Now, in her view, there is a solid foundation for moving forward. And the meeting in Luanda confirmed that Europe is united in its support for Ukraine.
Ukraine's territory and sovereignty must be respected. Only Ukraine, as a sovereign state, can make decisions regarding its armed forces. The choice of their fate is in their own hands. I also want to emphasize the central role of Europe in the country's future. Tomorrow, we will continue to engage with our partners from the coalition of the willing.
After the negotiations in Geneva, the U.S. Secretary of State stated that the meeting was, I quote, the most productive in all 10 months of work on the peace process. Several points of the framework document were adjusted and work on it continues.
Ukraine is ready for substantive negotiations to end the war, including at the level of leaders. At the same time, we must define Ukraine's red lines, which no one has the right to cross. Not physically, not legally, not morally. No legal recognition of the Russian occupation of Ukrainian territories. No restrictions on the Ukrainian armed forces. No veto on Ukraine's right to choose its future alliances.
Ukraine supported a complete and unconditional ceasefire. Russia did not. Ukraine has always been ready for negotiations. Russia has not. Since Russia has not changed its position, neither have Sweden and the EU. Our position remains unchanged. To achieve a just and lasting peace, borders cannot be changed by force. There should be no restrictions on the Ukrainian armed forces. This would provoke further Russian aggression, and there can be no restrictions on the full sovereign right of the Ukrainian people to choose their own path, including the path to EU membership.
The negotiations in Geneva were very successful for the EU, summarized German Foreign Minister Johann Wadephul. According to him, all contentious issues concerning Europe as well as NATO were excluded from the framework document. Without coordination with Europe, no peace plan for Ukraine can be adopted, declared German Chancellor Friedrich Merz. After all, Ukrainian interests are also European interests, emphasized the head of government.
A number of issues have been clarified, but we also know that peace in Ukraine will not come overnight. Ukraine's interests are also the common interests of Europe, and we want to defend them together in the long term. This means that Ukraine should not be forced to make unilateral territorial concessions. Ukraine must continue to have the ability to effectively defend itself against aggression, and for this it needs strong armed forces and reliable security guarantees from its partners.
Meanwhile, in Moscow, they are in no hurry to comment on the results of the negotiations in Geneva. The Kremlin stated that Russia has not yet received any official information from the United States, and Putin's press secretary Peskov refused to comment on media reports.
Last night, Russia once again launched a massive strike at a time when Ukraine, together with America, Europe, and many other countries around the world, are working around the clock to stop the bloodshed. This was stated by President Volodymyr Zelensky. In the morning, he spoke with the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Keir Starmer expressed his condolences to the Ukrainian people. Zelensky also discussed steps to end the war with German Chancellor Friedrich Merz.
After the meetings in Geneva, we see many prospects that could make the path to peace a reality. There are significant results and still much work ahead. We coordinated our positions and priority issues for discussion, as well as some of our next steps and contacts. Volodymyr Zelensky, President of Ukraine, on Telegram.
the results of the negotiations in Geneva and security guarantees for Ukraine in the event of achieving peace were at the center of discussions at the meeting of the Coalition of the Willing. It was held online, and the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, also took part. The meeting was covered by Freedom TV channel's special correspondent in Europe, Vitaly Sizov. Let's watch the report.
The meeting became a logical continuation of the discussion of the US peace plan, which began this Sunday in Geneva. Before the session, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky spoke with UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer. According to the press service of the British Prime Minister, the leaders discussed international unity in supporting Ukraine and emphasized the importance of further work to prepare for the deployment of multinational forces after the cessation of hostilities. The British leader also spoke about this during the meeting. He also stated that in the coming weeks, the United Kingdom will supply Ukraine with additional missiles for air defense systems.
We all want to see a final end to Russia's barbarism in Ukraine and a just and lasting peace. These are our guiding principles, especially in recent days. And, as all colleagues from the Coalition of the Willing know, both of these words, just and lasting, carry enormous significance.
On the eve of this meeting, while announcing it, the head of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, once again outlined the fundamental points for the European Union that must be taken into account in any possible agreement.
First, borders cannot be changed by force. Second, Ukraine is a sovereign state, and there can be no restrictions on its armed forces that could make the country vulnerable to future attacks and thereby undermine European security. Third, it is essential to fully reflect the central role of the European Union in ensuring peace in Ukraine. Ukraine must have the freedom and sovereign right to choose its own destiny.
Opening the meeting, French President Emmanuel Macron called for making use of the opportunity provided by the United States to achieve peace, while also ensuring Ukraine receives sufficient security guarantees, not just promises on paper. This time, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio also joined the discussion, which underscores the seriousness of the talks.
We are clearly at a turning point. The negotiations are gaining new momentum, and we must seize this moment, not because there is cause for concern. Ukraine is strong, Russia is slow, and Europe is steadfast, but because at last there is a chance to achieve real progress toward lasting peace. But the absolute condition for lasting peace is a set of very reliable security guarantees, not just promises on paper. Ukraine has already received its share of promises, which were shattered by Russia's repeated acts of aggression, and real solid guarantees are a necessity.
The foreign ministers of the European Union are also preparing for their meeting, where on November 26th they are expected to sum up the results of an intense week of diplomacy. Their plans were shared by the press service of the EU Council.
The foreign ministers will discuss the latest developments in the context of a new positive momentum in efforts to achieve peace in Ukraine, following intensive high-level consultations at the G20 in Geneva and during the recent EU-African Union summit. From the statement by the EU Council press service,
a number of Ukraine's European allies see the basis for security guarantees for Ukraine in the deployment of troops on its territory after peace is achieved. Europe is also continuing to work on its own additions to the US peace plan in order to strengthen Ukraine's position. Vitaly Sizov, Ruslan Kuzgov from Brussels for Freedom TV channel.
Meanwhile, the Kremlin claims that they allegedly have not yet received the updated draft peace plan, which was revised following negotiations between Ukraine and the US in Geneva, Switzerland. According to Putin's press secretary Peskov, Russia supposedly remains completely open to the negotiation process. And I would add that President Trump's plan could serve as a good basis for negotiations. Negotiations on the draft peace plan between U.S. Army Secretary Dan Driscoll and the Russian delegation in Abu Dhabi are going well. This was stated by the press secretary of the U.S. Army Secretary Jeff Tolbert, as also reported by The Guardian. He emphasized that the main goal is to achieve a lasting peace in Ukraine, and the American delegation is optimistic about this. Also in the United Arab Emirates is the head of Ukrainian intelligence Kirilo Budanov. According to the publication Axios, the Ukrainian delegation is holding negotiations with both the Americans and the Russians. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky may visit the United States as early as the end of November. This was reported by the Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine, Rustem Umerov. There, the head of state will meet with American leader Donald Trump to discuss the details of the peace plan. Umerov emphasized that Ukraine values the productive and constructive meetings in Geneva between the Ukrainian and American delegations, as well as President Trump's efforts aimed at ending the war.
We are counting on the support of our European partners in the next steps. We expect to arrange a visit by the President of Ukraine to the United States at the earliest possible date in November, in order to complete the final stages and reach an agreement with President Trump. Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine, on Telegram.
The Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant will require a special status if a peace agreement is reached. This was stated by the head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Rafael Grossi. He added that this is a political issue that Ukraine and Russia will resolve at a certain point. Since 2022, all 6 reactors at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant have been in cold shutdown. The IAEA is constantly present at the facility to monitor safety amid ongoing Russian shelling,